Ratio Christi's goal is to help equip students to know why they believe what they believe and to be able to defend it in the marketplace of ideas. We believe the Bible pertains to all areas of life, and we can glean principles from the Bible and apply those principles, and I believe that is the biblical principle of wisdom. If knowledge is the acquisition of truth, then wisdom is the proper usage of truth, and God's word is true. And tonight is basically just to frame the argument. It's to help kind of give a preview for the semester and get some of the fine points out of the way so we can move forward. Next week, we're actually going to talk about the biblical role of government. And we're going to look at principles from Scripture and go as comprehensive as we can in about a half-hour time period. Focusing primarily on New Testament passages, but also gleaning wisdom from the Old Testament, we're hoping to start getting people not only thinking about why they believe what they believe, but better understand why other people believe what they believe. Because if you're talking with someone, whether it's about a political issue, an economic issue, or a spiritual issue, you need to be able to find that common ground. So throughout the series, we're also going to show you how to ask thought-provoking questions and kind of take a step back from where you are and look at the bigger picture and have a better understanding of where they're coming from so you two can really get at it. Because unfortunately, a lot of times when we get into a really deep conversation, and all the time we've been using the same terms, all of a sudden we realize we were using different meanings. So we're going to show how apologetics applies to that. Because that's one of the biggest problems in apologetics, besides knowing how to defend your beliefs, is how to articulate them so the other side can understand them. So we're going to overcome that hurdle. All right, so tonight our topic is, does religion and politics mix? I'm sure you've seen signs around campus about our series, The Intersection of Christianity and Politics. And I'm going to say right off the bat that primarily we are not a political club. But like I said, the Bible pertains to all areas of life, and we're going to apply God's truth to areas such as politics. I think the first step to really approach this topic correctly is to really define your terms. All right, so what is politics? We hear it all the time, and I pulled two definitions. One is really old and one is really current, because it's important to have a frame of reference of, since we're looking at the Constitution throughout the series and old documents, we want to know kind of what the mindset of that period was, as well as today. So the definition from Webster's 1828 dictionary for politics is the science of government, that part of ethics which consists in the regulation and government of a nation or state for the preservation of its safety, peace, and prosperity, comprehending the defense of its existence and rights against foreign control or conquest, and the protection of its citizens in their rights with the preservation and improvement of their morals. Does that sound like anything you'd read in a college textbook or modern dictionary? Part of ethics?
Yeah, I was about to say.
That's like their first flag is like, all right, something's changed. So let's look at a modern dictionary. This one's pulled from the World English Dictionary at dictionary.com, but also look at Webster's and a couple other modern ones, and they all basically said the same thing. Politics, the practice or study of the art and science of forming, directing, and administrating states and other political units. The art and science of government, political science. A little bit more concise. When we're thinking about it, what is politics? What is running the government? What does the government really do, or what is it supposed to do? Do we really need a government? What would life be like if there was no government? I mean, what would anarchy be like? Well, these are the type of questions that we really want to think about and look at, because anytime we make a complaint about the government or we think about what the government should be like, we need to start really look at the roots. So for tonight's purposes, we're going to look at the basic function of government. All right, the Declaration of Independence states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." So according to the Declaration of Independence, 1, men are created equal. 2, the truths are self-evident, meaning they don't really need to be explained. They're just obvious. These rights are endowed by their Creator, so that's acknowledging God. and that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, so really the function of government is to preserve rights. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, one major theme we're going to see throughout the series is the source of your rights and freedoms. And it's very important because if you go to any conservative blog, you'll see them constantly talk about how our rights and freedoms are being eroded slowly by the government. And there's two mindsets that are really coming to force here. We have the mindset of, for lack of better terms, the atheist, those that don't adhere to God, don't believe He exists, or at least isn't acting in this world today. And they believe that education in mankind is the solution to all man's problems. If there's a problem, better education will help fix it, better leaders will help fix it. Man is the chief cornerstone of all living things. The other view, for our intents and purposes, is that God exists and that our rights, our value, and our worth come from Him. So these are two stark contrasts, and you'll see this contrast become more and more black and white as we go through the semester. But the thing I really want you to get out of this moment is that if rights come from God, He is the ultimate authority, and no one can take those unalienable rights from us. If rights come from the government, then they can take those rights away. So the last phrase is, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. For our Declaration of Independence and our establishment of government in America, our government is done by the consent of the governed. So I'm not sure if any of you have heard of the French philosopher Frédéric Bastiat, but he lived in the mid-19th century, and he came to America because he heard great things about this country. And he had some great insights. And I just wanted to share one or two with you just to help you think about the concept of law and government. Okay, so he's talking about the clear case for legitimate government and the importance of the rule of law. And I quote, "If every person has the right to defend, even by force, his person, his liberty, and his property, then it follows that a group of men have the right to organize and support a common force to protect those rights constantly. Thus, the principle of collective right, its reason for existing, its lawfulness, is based on individual right. Since an individual cannot lawfully use force against another person, liberty, or property of another individual, then the common force, for the same reason, cannot lawfully be used to destroy the person, liberty, or property of individuals or groups. If this is true, then nothing can be more evident than this. The law is the organization of the natural right of lawful defense. It is the substitution of the common force for individual forces, and this common force is to do only what the individual forces have a natural and lawful right to do, to protect persons, liberties, and properties, to maintain the right of each, and to cause justice to reign over all." Okay, so basically what he is saying is one of the reasons America is so great and had such a great reputation in the mid-19th century is because they took the concept of if an individual has a right to the protection of his property and his self, then a group of people have that same liberty and right to have their property and self protected. And so the law exists for that purpose, to protect people and their property. So in many ways, the law is for the protecting of individuals' God-given rights. So what is the most basic function of the government? I would argue to uphold the law. And that's why we have a constitutional republic with a representative democracy. Now, personally, even have gone through the public school system, I didn't really understand what it meant to live in a republic or in a democracy up until about a year or two ago when I really started caring about politics with the 2008 elections. And so in the past couple of months to prepare for this, I've read a lot of political science books and books on the founding of this country, and I have a much clearer picture of it. I don't know about you, but having come to the understanding of the basis and the reasons our founding fathers set up the Constitution the way they did, it really helped make the liberties and freedoms of America that much more apparent to me. Now, the reason we're covering this particularly is because going back to that idea of either man is the supreme authority or God is the supreme authority, we're seeing this little battle of worldviews, if I can put it that way, going on in our culture right now. There are some in our country that believe that the Constitution still remains supreme, that it is the law of the land. We also have a group of people that want to turn us more into a socialistic country. And we're going to get more into the differences there in coming weeks, because it's a really huge, complicated task to handle, because there's just a lot of parts to it. So I really hope you guys hang with us as we go through this. And I promise you, if you come to each session over the next 2 or 3 months, you will have a very clear picture of not only the purpose of the forms of government and why America is the bastion of freedom, but also the downfalls of these competing ideas that are trying to change America. And personally, having a biblical backing for this will help you in being able to defend your beliefs, not only in politics, but also your belief in God, which is why we're here. But moving forward, so let me break down constitutional republic first. All right, republic, it's Latin. Res means thing, public means public, so it's the public thing. It refers to the law. All right, so if you think about different political systems in the past, you have various forms of government. Probably the most prevalent in your mind is probably a monarchy, like with a king, or some sort of form of democracy, or a republic like what we're in. Now, under the rule of the king can be very arbitrary. He can just he can have laws that are very defined, or he can make them suit his needs. If you have an objective law, then everyone is held to that standard, and except for maybe abuses by a king or a president against those standards, everyone knows what the rules are, and so they can't be disadvantaged. Okay, so in a republic, we have the common law, or in our case, the Constitution. And it's a standard for everyone to live by. And we need a standard set of laws so that judges or kings know how to rule by the law. In 1775, John Adams defined a republic to be a government of laws and not of men. So I really want you guys to really grasp onto this idea that in our country, laws, not men, dictate our rights. And ultimately, we have unalienable rights given by God. So let's keep going. According to the Declaration of Independence, which I just quoted, law is needed and unalienable rights come from God. Okay. Now, to describe what we have functionally, legislators have a purpose. One is to uphold the Constitution, and really we have the 3 branches of government that really they're all centered around the law. The executive branch executes and makes sure the law is upheld. The judicial branch judges based on precedent, and the legislative branch makes new laws. Now, these new laws should not ever contradict old laws, especially not the Constitution. That's why we continuously have legislation, because as society changed, we have new needs for new laws. But there has to be a question, is there any boundary to those laws? Can they just continuously make laws? What happens if those laws erode rights that the Constitution gives? Well, those are very important questions. And in the course of this, a very significant question I like to raise is, can the government legislate morality? Now, if you think about it, there's really two ways of looking at this. All right, so morals are just basically, I didn't have it defined here, so I'll just put it as what we would consider right or wrong. Okay. All right, so when you're looking at legislation, there's 2 types. There's either don't, like the Ten Commandments, don't kill, don't steal, don't harm other people. So that's to protect people. And then there's also types of legislations that have moral implications. Now, Frederick Bastiat, who I just quoted, I want to quote him again because he puts this topic in a very wonderful perspective. You too. Okay, so this is by Jim DeMint. It's called Saving Freedom. Jim DeMint is a really very solid U.S. senator, and this book is called Saving Freedom. I highly recommend it if you want a good primer on government, freedom, rights, the whole gauntlet. Best collection of thought I've ever seen on the topic. I'm going to begin quoting him, and then I'm going to get into Bossiet. DeMint says, he makes the case that despite the best intentions of government officials, the law should not be used as an instrument to achieve charitable or social ends. Once the law becomes a flexible tool for social ends, it is no longer respectable or legitimate. Now, Bossiet says, now, legal plunder can be committed in an infinite number of ways. Thus, we have an infinite number of plans for organizing it. Tariffs, protection, benefits, subsidies, encouragements, progressive taxation, public schools, guaranteed jobs, guaranteed profits, minimum wages, a right to relief, a right to the tools of labor, free credit, and so on and so on. All these plans as a whole, with their common aim of legal plunder, constitute socialism. Now, I quoted that because the idea of legal plunder is very prevalent in our society. It's been going on for probably at least 80 years that I can think of, that maybe a little bit longer. But the idea is legal plunder. Plunder just means theft. Old book. He wrote it back in the mid 1800s. All right. So legal plunder. It's where the state, where the state can legally take. Thank you. Can legally take something from you. Now, there is a legitimate need for taxes. Well, when we get into the biblical role for government, we'll see that there are legitimate uses that the government has for taking taxes and tribute and what have you for just causes, such as the judicial system, I can't pronounce it, I'm sorry, or the defense of a country. But there's also illegitimate needs, or some would call them that. Others would say that they are rights. These would be to just be really simple social programs, such as one of the various welfare programs our country offers. It is where you take from one person and you give it to another. Now, if I were to do that, you say that's theft. If I took from your wallet without your permission, you would, try to get it back from me, or you'd, find an officer and have him deal with me, because that is the law. The purpose of the law is to protect you from someone else harming you or stealing from you. But if the government does it, it's either legitimate or it's legal plunder. And I really want you guys, if you watch the news at all, look at how the newscasters paint the picture of the social welfare programs, all the people they're helping, all the good that is coming of it. But at the same time, from a very practical point of view, they're all going bankrupt, so they don't really work that well. And a major implication of it is the more the government taxes you, the less money you have to invest in something. Maybe it's in personal property like gas or clothes. Maybe it's to give to a charity. Now, if the government gives to a charity, to a good cause, hey, good, those people are being helped. But you have to realize that as you're being taxed, or however the government gets that money from you, various means, you have to realize that there's bureaucracy in there. There's someone that has to manage the money, has to receive the money, give the money out. Someone has to regulate those people to make sure they're ethical. There's a lot of overhead that the money goes to, as opposed to if you want to donate to a good cause, you just write them a check and there it goes. So they get 100% of the money, as opposed to maybe 30%. The other problem is, since this is a Christian organization, and if you're not a Christian, you're more than welcome here. Any good we do needs to be in the name of the Lord. Be blessed in the name of Jesus Christ. Hey, you need some money? Here, let me help you with that need. Now, if they're receiving it from the government, well, a major problem with that is, it's from the government. My Savior, the government is here because, once again, the worldview is man the ultimate authority, or is God the ultimate authority? If the state is, then the state is what people look to for dependency. They're like, oh, hey, I don't have a job. Can I get, some welfare checks? Oh, how can I work the system so I can get more welfare checks? Unfortunately, if people start relying on the government, then the government not only controls them economically, but they also control the people they're taxing economically, at least to some extent. That there are things that the government ought to be doing, and there's some things that I would say, arguably, the government should not be doing. And next week, we'll see a lot of the biblical perspective on that. Yeah, these are two really good quotes. They're both from Jim DeMint. The legitimate government must be restrained by fixed boundaries made clear to citizens and legislators in advance. That is why every congressman, senator, president, Supreme Court justice, and all federal officials and military officers swear an oath to defend and protect the Constitution. My aside. Many in current administration have openly said they've never read the Constitution. So I don't think they're upholding it if they don't know what it says. Just a thought. Back to the quote. None of them swear to do what they think is best. They swear to govern within the boundaries of the Constitution. Without adherence to a Constitution, laws and lawmaking become completely arbitrary. Our founders referred to arbitrary laws as the rule of men. Continuing on, the U.S. Constitution limits the role of the federal government to a few areas: national defense, economic facilitation, such as the standardization of the currency, so that instead of every state having its own currency, we have a U.S. currency, ports and maritime commerce, the regulation of interstate commerce, federal roads, referred to as postal roads in the Constitution, and a justice system made up of the Supreme Court and lower courts. Most Americans would be surprised to find the Constitution does not prescribe any federal role for education, health care, retirement pensions, disability, etc. Look at the second half of a constitutional republic with a representative democracy. Now this is the big thing. When I was growing up, I remember around 1990, the people reporting the news would call our country a republic or a democratic republic. Then I remembered around Clinton's second term, about 96, they had only referred to it as a democracy, and our wars were spreading democracy around the world. All right, so there's a difference between a representative democracy and a democracy. Democracy is purely rule of the majority. If 51% agree, hey, that's law. And several of the founding fathers called a democracy, a pure democracy, a mobocracy. Because if you can convince a mob a certain direction, well, that's the way people will go. All right, so that's not how we were originally set up. We're set up as a representative democracy, which means that basically we have representatives that we elect to represent our interest and our position, and they vote on it, and they uphold our interest. All right, so since morality is being legislated, people's properties and fortunes are being impacted. So it seems everyone should have a voice in what the government does. I talk about Christian involvement in government, because this is one of the big red flags when we talk about mixing religion and politics. Okay, so the First Amendment. Just to give you a very brief summary of the situation on the separation of church and state. In 1802, Thomas Jefferson wrote to the pastor head of the Danbury Baptist Association because his friend had mailed him out of concern about the First Amendment. And Jefferson said, and I'll quote just that part. Wrong book. 152. And Jefferson said, believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislators should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation of church and state. So basically, to really understand this, you have to think about where Americans came from originally. You know, England with the crown and the religious persecution there. And they did not want the government dictating who you could worship or what the state religion was. And so the First Amendment was set there as handcuffs, as are the other 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights, as a restriction on what Congress can do. And so Congress can Congress can make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, if you read this, which you're welcome to borrow if you're so inclined, he goes into a brief history of it, breaking down that that the government cannot restrict your open worship of God, and they cannot set a national religion. He also goes into the previous revisions of that phrase, where originally it was going to be denomination, not religion. But basically, in the mid-20th century, a court judged on the issue, used that one phrase from Jefferson, saying a separation of creating a wall between church and state, used it in the opposite meaning of his intention, and basically said that the government cannot acknowledge or put one religion over another. And that has slowly evolved into the secularization or the removing of God from government acknowledgement, which is why we have so many cases where the Ten Commandments are being removed from classrooms and courtrooms and what have you. It's been removing God from the public sphere, and that's really been the trend ever since, which also plays into the idea of, is God supreme or is man supreme? Because as our country moves forward, it is going to be increasingly hostile to Christianity, because we still typically adhere to a constitutional republic where the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Or is man supreme? And if man is supreme, then there's no problem removing God from the public sphere, because he's simply a crutch. So, in conclusion, religious freedom really does correlate to political and civil freedoms.